Okay, so we are starting with Matthew chapter 5, verse 3, which is the Beatitudes. And I cannot tell you how many times I've studied the Beatitudes in my life. Y'all know that, the first place I went after I came home from the hospital being born was church. So I've studied them a time or two. This makes them make more sense than anything I have ever read. And so I have thoroughly enjoyed reading this. So we're going to start with the first one. Um, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What do y'all think that means? Before I tell you.
Disheartened, depressed, disillusioned.
Okay.
I didn't know what any of the Beatitudes meant until I read this book. I was way off base on all of them.
Well, I felt pretty much off base after I read this too.
Would it be the unsaved having the Spirit?
Well, hold on. And before I get there, he did this out of order as well. He says, before we study each one, there are two general facts that you need to know. It can be seen that every one of the Beatitudes has exactly the same form, and you're used to that. And that there is no verb in the actual way it's written in Greek. Where we've got blessed are, the whatever are is a verb, there is no verb in the real ones. So that it would be better to say, oh, the blessedness of those who are like this. Yeah, so that's the first thing. The blessedness of, or if later on he uses the word bliss. The bliss of. That is most important, for it means that the Beatitudes are not pious hopes of what will be. They are not glowing, but vague prophecies of some future bliss. They are congratulations on what is. So it's here, it's now. We have it available to us. The blessedness which belongs to Christians is not a blessedness which is postponed to some future world of glory. It's a blessedness which exists here and now. It is not something into which we will enter. It is something into which we have already entered. And the second thing is that the word blessed or blessed, whichever way you pronounce it, is used in each one of the Beatitudes. And as Kitten said last week, he does this tremendous entomology of where the words came from. And if you're into that, you can read it. I'll hit on some of it, but not every bit of it. But blessed describes the joy which has its secret within itself, joy that is serene and untouchable, self-contained, that joy which is completely independent of all the chances and changes of life. The English word happiness means chance. So this joy is so deep, it comes to us from our walk with Jesus Christ. So the greatness of the Beatitudes is that they are not wistful glimpses. They're not even golden promises. They are triumphant shouts of bliss or a permanent joy that nothing in the world can ever take away.
You know, I can't help but wonder if people back then understood what was coming out of his mouth. His disciples didn't get it. When he's sitting on a hillside talking to multitudes, I doubt very seriously they understood the detail of what he was saying.
Right. And I wonder if they ever I wonder even if years later they had even figured it out.
Oh, I think some did, to varying degrees.
Yeah.
And maybe some of the disciples got it, and their preaching after he was crucified was actually pretty good.
That makes sense to me.
I mean, look, we all are in our 50s, 60s, and 70s, and we've been working on understanding this you know,
Our
Yeah.
whole lives.
our whole lives, and there's different meanings that come to us at different times.
Well, I agree with Sarah. I didn't have a clue about the Beatitudes until I read Barclay.
You know, a translation that when the Good News Bible came out and the Beatitudes there are translated happy, is the poor in spirit, what they use happy. And that was an eye opener for me as far as what the Beatitudes were about.
Yeah.
At the time I thought, oh, this is kind of silly, but you know,
Yeah.
I also realized the level of meaning that it had.
Yeah. Okay, so going back specifically to what I just read, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He talks about how in Greek there are two words for poor. One would be what we would call in the United States today the working poor, where you've got a job, you make enough money to pay the bills and put some food on the table, but there is no cushion. You're, one layoff away from, being in a line for a soup kitchen. And then you've got the line for poor, the word for poor, that means to crouch or to cower. It describes the poverty of those literally forced to their knees to beg. So that's the level of poor that they're talking about here. Blessed are those who are abjectly and completely poverty stricken. Blessed are those who are absolutely destitute. Now, of course, for Barclay, that's not the end of the story. Because he goes on to say, this is not to say that being so poor that you are starving to death, that is never, ever a good thing. There's a 4-stage development of this meaning. The Hebrews began by immediately just meaning poor. And then they went on to mean you're poor, therefore you have no influence or power. You don't have any help, you don't have any prestige. And then they went on and said, because you have no influence, therefore you are downtrodden and oppressed. And finally, they came to say, those who, because they have no earthly resources, whatever, put their trust in God. So to be poor in spirit means that you are aware that you don't have anything unless you have it in God. And that these people put all their eggs in God's basket, and therefore they are blessed. So a better way to put it would be, blessed are those who have realized their own utter helplessness and who have put their whole trust in God. Which is
totally different than what I always thought that meant.
Right.
What did you think it meant?
Poor in spirit, I always interpreted as maybe weak in faith or struggling or doubting.
Mm.
And this completely turns that around, doesn't it?
Exact opposite.
Yeah.
Boy, we all get an F today.
Well, we always knew that you could be rich in earthly riches and still be poor in God's book. We knew that.
Right.
But I didn't know it meant this.
Right.
Yeah, he goes on to say, if people have realized their own utter helplessness and have put their whole trust in God, there will enter into their lives two elements which are opposite sides of the same coin. They will become completely detached from material things, for they will note that things do not have the power to bring happiness or security. And I think we've all gotten at least to that point. And they will become completely attached to God, for they will know that God alone can bring them help, hope, and strength. Those who are poor in spirit are men and women who have realized that things mean nothing and that God means everything.
That's why a lot of monastic orders have a vow of poverty.
Yeah. So then he rewords it. And I like the way he does this. He explains all the words and then he completely rewrites it. So here is the first beatitude rewritten by Barclay. Oh, the bliss of those who have realized their own utter helplessness and those who have put their whole trust in God, for thus alone can they render to God that perfect obedience which will make them citizens of the kingdom of heaven.
But the first indented sentence on page 106, we didn't discuss that. It says, we must be careful not to think that this beatitude calls actual material poverty a good thing.
Right.
I think we should mention that.
Yeah, well, I thought I did, but anyway, it's good to bring it up again. Yeah, poverty is not a good thing. Jesus would never have called blessed a state where people live in slums and do not have enough to eat, where health deteriorates. And yeah, so yeah, that's.
I'm sorry if you mentioned that and I missed it. I'm sorry.
No, no problem. It's a good thing to repeat. Any other comments about this first one?
I went to get my copy of The Message. Cindy's read from it sometimes because it's a translation and paraphrase. He goes into longer things like Barclay did in translating this verse. And so how he translated this beatitude, you're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more of God and his rule. So
That's an interesting way to put it.
anyhow.
Hey,
Okay.
Sarah.
Hmm.
On the middle of page 106, where it says right there behind poverty of spirit, the poverty which is blessed is the poverty of spirit, which is,
Yes.
I think, what Nancy thought it meant.
Yeah.
When people realize their own utter lack of resources to meet life and find their help and strength in God, and I put a question mark beside that because I don't have an utter lack of resources to meet life. So I don't have poverty of spirit because I have resources to meet my daily needs. So I'm not struggling like that. So I think that means I probably can't understand fully what this level of obviously poverty is because I've never experienced it.
Right. That was kind of my reaction to most of this was I have never been in this spot.
Yeah.
We haven't been there yet. I think it can happen to anyone at any time.
Right. And there have been times in my life when I was a lot closer, when I was a young adult, I was a lot closer to it than I am now. But
Remember when you were shooting rabbits for dinner, right?
squirrels, yes.
You told us that was in Mississippi, right? As a young
Yeah.
starving student.
Yeah.
Yeah, you told us about that.
Yeah, my friends were shooting the squirrels and bringing them to me for me to eat. So yeah, I've been a lot
You have
closer.
a poverty of spirit throughout your life, like you might have not been so attuned to God, and therefore your poverty of spirit at that time. It's not, you know what I mean? You're just not always on the best path.
Well, and I guess, Gail, that's a good point. Since we were all raised in the church, we weren't at a point where we never had God as a resource, but other people have been poor in spirit when they were lost, not raised in the church. I know Sarah's told us the Ann Thomas story. Kendra Verbeek has told us she wasn't raised in the church actively going. She got that through John. So some people may have experienced the poverty of spirit, sort of, kind of.
And I just always, when I get to poverty, then it's poverty of spirit. And I keep analyzing that part of it. Me looking at, I understand, poverty of material things, but to me, it is very significant that Jesus says poverty of spirit. And that always struck me as someone who is, when you have the spirit, you have closeness with God. When you don't, you're distanced. So that's why I like Barclay's interpretation, but to me, there's not enough emphasis on that spirit aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah, because he turns it upside down from, what most of us have thought. Because people who are poor in spirit realize their own helplessness and therefore if you are poor in spirit, you are putting all of your trust in God because you realize you can't.
I can remember when my dad was in the hospital, and when I was helpless to do anything, to help him.
Yeah.
And that's often when we go to prayer, that's the only thing, so it's just, I think that's when, I pray. And I remember just going in and saying the Lord's Prayer over and over and over and over again, because I didn't know what else to do.
Right.
And so I think that blessed are those who have realized their own utter helplessness. And we often realize that we think we've got all this control over our life. We always try to get insurance and get this, and so we're always kind of in control. And then you realize, all of us have had times when we realized we have no control at all over some things.
Yeah.
And so it's that then knowing that the only place you have to turn to, is God. And when we think that we're in control sometime, that's probably when we should be going to God a lot more, because
Right.
we aren't in control over so many things.
That's an illusion.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to the next one. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And he goes on to say that this is an amazing kind of bliss. Never a word I would have put on that. Blessed are those who mourn life, who mourn like those mourning for the dead. And he talks about how this is the utter, gut-wrenching, you've lost the most important person in your life. It's that level of mourning. It's because those of you that have lost various people in your lives know that there are different levels of mourning depending on how close you were to that person. So he gives you 3 different ways that this can be taken. One, it can be taken quite literally. Blessed are those who have endured the bitterest sorrow that life can bring. The Arabs have a proverb that says, all sunshine makes a desert. Sorrow can do 2 things for us. It can show us, as nothing else can, the essential kindness of others. And it can show us, as nothing else can, the comfort and the compassion of God. Because when you are at that level of sorrow, other people hopefully reach out. Number 2, some people have taken this to mean, blessed are those who are desperately sorry for the sorrow and the suffering of this world. Let me read that again, because that's a different take on it. Blessed are those who are desperately sorry for the sorrow and the suffering of this world.
Sarah, isn't that what they do at Richmond Hill? Don't they pray for the suffering and sorrow in the world on a daily basis, hourly? They'll pray for policemen, and they'll pray for rescue squad people, and they pray for teachers, and they pray for groups of people every day, all the time.
Rich,
Part of their ritual.
in my mind, and before it is what it is now, it was a convent that prayed continuously there.
It was, the convent was, the bishop here in Richmond asked this order of nuns to come to Richmond to pray for the city as it recovered from the Civil War, was how.
Oh, really?
And the,
Ooh.
what are they, Bud? The Sisters of Monte Cristo. It goes on. The convent, when they moved out, they are now out in Goochland on land that backs up to Springfield Christian Church, which is in Western Hanover, is where the convent is now. And then that's when Richmond Hill was developed as a ecumenical, non-denominational prayer and retreat center. And they decided to continue that tradition of praying for the city.
I'm sure I was told that when I went there with Cindy as education chair, but I forgot that piece. Thank you, Kathy. That's very interesting.
Okay, when we are thinking of the first beatitude, when we looked at it, we saw that it is always right to be detached from things, but it is never right to be detached from people. This world would have been a very much poorer place if there had not been those who cared intensely about the sorrows and sufferings of others. This sentence just smacked me upside the head. Christianity is caring.
I highlighted that one.
See, it hit you upside the head too.
It did. It did.
Christianity is caring.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, like the book of James says, you have to use your hands and feet to show you mean what you say. You have to care about other people by doing stuff. You can't just say, yeah, I care, I'm saved, I want to go to heaven, and then sit down and wait. You can't, you got to go do stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This beatitude does mean, blessed are those who care intensely for the suffering and for the sorrows and for the needs of others. And then the third way you can look at this, no doubt both of these thoughts are in this beatitude, but its main thought undoubtedly is this: blessed are those who are desperately sorry for their own sin and their own unworthiness.
And mourning takes many different forms.
Yes. As we have seen, the very first word of the message of Jesus was repent. We cannot repent unless we are sorry for our sins. The thing which really changes people is when they suddenly come up against something which open their eyes to what sin is and what sin does.
I do think it's worth mentioning that detaching yourself from people who repeatedly hurt you and say, I'm sorry, do it again, I'm sorry, do it again, I'm sorry, do it again, like alcoholics, drug addicts, what have you. I think it's worth mentioning. I don't think that's what he means here.
I agree.
Yeah, I think it's okay because I have detached myself from family members. There are family members I have no contact with.
Right.
Immediate family members, no contact, not interested.
Right. So Christianity begins with a sense of sin. Blessed are those who are intensely sorry for their sin, those who are heartbroken for what their sin has done to God and to Jesus Christ, to those who see the cross and who are appalled by the havoc wrought by sin. So this is Barclay's rewriting of the second beatitude. Oh, the bliss of those whose hearts are broken for the world's suffering and for their own sin, for out of their sorrow they will find the joy of God.
The rewriting is a lot more meaningful.
Yes. Any other comments?
So then is the emphasis on repentance versus mourning?
Well, it's actually two pieces, because it says their hearts are broken for the world's suffering. So there's the mourning part, but their hearts are broken for their own sin and for the harm that they have caused other people. So it's a two-pronged thing. But out of their sorrow, they find the joy of God. So something to think about. Moving on to the third one. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Now, in today's English language, the word meek is not considered a compliment. If I were to say, Nancy Maiden, I think you're meek, she almost,
You'd be lying.
I'd be lying, and she almost spit out whatever she was drinking at that moment. Because meek just means, wimpy and no backbone. And I don't know anybody in this group that would meet that.
Doormat, you think doormat, just lets people walk all over them.
Yeah. Well, in ancient Greece, it was one of the main ethical words. To be meek was to have a form of ethics. So
Mm.
it has changed the way it, what it means. It was Aristotle's, let me make sure I get all of this. Aristotle has a great deal to say about the quality of meekness. It was Aristotle's fixed method to define every virtue as the happy medium between two extremes. On the one hand, there was the extreme of excess. On the other hand, there was the extreme of defect. And in between, there was the virtue itself, the happy medium. So to give you a different example, in terms of money, you've got the extreme of the spendthrift who spends every penny they've got. And then on the other extreme, you've got the miser. And in the middle, what you've got is a generous person, which is what you're aiming for. So in terms of meekness, it's a balance between too much and too little anger. So a possible translation could be, blessed are those who are always angry at the right time and never angry at the wrong time.
But I always equated meekness more in this sense of being humble. And I don't have anger figure into that in any way.
Yeah.
I don't associate anger with this either.
I don't either.
It's interesting though, because Jesus was really good at that. He was really good at being angry when he should be angry and not when he shouldn't be.
And I don't really remember him being angry a lot. It was
No.
very carefully chosen times.
Right. And maybe that's the point. If we ask what the right time and the wrong time are, we may say as a general rule for life that it is never right to be angry for any insult or injury done to ourselves, that's something no Christian must ever resent, but it is often right to be angry at injuries done to other people.
I don't think I understood the first part of that. I put a question mark in the margin. What does that mean to you? It's never okay to be angry for an insult that you caused to yourself or that someone did to you.
For the way I read it was that somebody did to me.
You see, I disagree with that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, but then, how many times should I turn the other cheek?
yeah,
7
and not
times?
be a doormat, right?
Well, I remember Cindy talking on this topic, and she said, it's one thing to forgive. It's something else to be the doormat. Her thing was forgive and get out of the way, was what she said. Like Kitten said, you don't leave yourself in a place to be a doormat. And I don't know that this says stay there and take it forever. But if somebody insults you, you don't get mad about it. You may get yourself out of the way, but you don't get mad at the person who insulted you.
Well, I think that's human.
Well, yeah, Jesus frequently was asking us to not be as human as we are.
Well, good Lord, he made us.
Yeah.
I put a flaw in the system.
You see this all the time in our culture right now. If somebody says something that the other person doesn't like, it's the Jerry Springer mentality. It's okay to jump out of your chair and hit him in the head, and that's just not right. And back in the day that Jesus was talking, the retribution could have taken even more severe forms. So
Well, it does now.
yeah,
It does now, yeah. A lot.
Every time we have a mass shooting, it seems like, the precipitant is somebody feeling like they needed to get revenge on something.
yeah.
And not just mass shootings. I mean, just shooting one
Right.
person. You've insulted me. I've got a gun. There, you're dead.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, if you work in public schools these days, Especially middle school and high school.
I can't tell you how many times I would get the group of girls around the table in my office. Now you say what you said, you say what you said, and almost 100% of the time, oh, that's not what Susan told me you said. Well, I didn't say that. And and in less than 20 minutes, we had it worked out where the whole telephone chain was misconstrued. And like you just said, people take out a gun and shoot people and then find out, oh, that isn't what you did. Well, it's too late then.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I find it a whole lot easier to forgive somebody who says something to me or does something to me than if they screw with my family, my friends, my employees. That is a little bit harder to deal with.
That's what this is saying. You're doing what this says. Don't get angry when people are doing it to you. It's always appropriate, or usually, I won't say always, to be appropriate when you see it happen to somebody else. That you step in for the protection of somebody else.
Well, what times do we have as an example when Jesus got mad? Okay, when he went to the temple. I mean, that's the maddest I think I remember.
Right.
One of the maddest times.
Susan, do you think he was mad when he came back 3 times and the disciples were sleeping? He seemed to be mad. Did that rise to the level of mad? Could you not stay awake 1 hour?
All that mostly as disappointment, but
Yeah, okay.
I saw the second thing I thought of was when Peter when he told Peter, "Get behind me, Satan."
Yeah.
That I think was he was seeing something coming between God and the temple, that they were doing things against God. And that's when I think he got the maddest, was when he saw people doing that.
And when James and John asked if they could sit
Oh, yeah, it's right. Yeah.
on the right. Yeah.
Wasn't there one place where he referred to people as vipers? It might have been
Brood of vipers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the brood of
Wasn't that
vipers.
John the Baptist? I think I just read that. I think it was John the Baptist.
Oh, okay.
Didn't we
I
just
I
talk
thought for
about
some
that?
reason that the Jewish
No, I think
hierarchy he was kind of put off with them.
was that at the temple?
It might have been.
All right, I'm looking back to see, because we just talked about John.
Well, I'll step up and say that
Yeah, he did. John the Baptist called the Pharisees and Sadducees the brood of vipers.
Okay.
All right, and
Good memory, Claire.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
yeah, Claire.
No, I just
I
read
think
it. I
Jesus-
just read it. That's cheating.
The old saying,
All right, wait a minute. Let me look it up. Chapter 3. Brood of vipers. John. It's in John also. John 5 and Matthew 21. So I think Jesus used that term too.
That could have been a very, very common insult back in the day.
May have been, yeah.
Okay, Bud.
Well, to some extent, I mean, there are degrees of madness, I guess. And I think he was mad quite often when he realized that the disciples just weren't getting the message. And he was mad when he went to raise Lazarus from the dead and people didn't really believe. I don't know, I'm not really up on all that too much, but it just seems like there's mad and there's just extreme frustration.
Yeah. And the two things feel very similar. Okay, a second way to look at this has to do with the word used when an animal has been domesticated and has been trained to obey the word of command and learn to respond to reins. So another way to reword this: blessed are those who have every instinct, every impulse, every passion under control. Blessed are those who are entirely self-controlled.
Do we know a person like that?
I don't.
I don't either.
Now remember, this is Barclay's
Yeah,
interpretation.
yeah. So being totally self-controlled would be one way to look at being meek.
I mean, I think there are some people in some moments exhibit incredible self-control,
Right. But not,
not forever.
right.
And not in all circumstances.
Right.
I think I like the first version better, the balance with the anger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. And then he goes on and talks about there's still a third side, and it has to do with humility, the true humility which banishes all pride. Without humility, we cannot learn. For the first step to learning is the realization of our own ignorance. And although I'm not a parent, never have been, that sentence made me think about, teenagers and college freshmen who know everything. So, they weren't ready to learn. The acceptance of the necessity to learn and of the necessity to be forgiven is a way to describe the humility. It describes the only proper attitude to God. So his third possible translation is this: blessed are those who have the humility to know their own ignorance, their own weakness, and their own need. And it is in this meekness, Jesus says, it is this meekness which will inherit the earth. It is the fact of history that it has always been those who possess this gift of self-control, those with their passions, instincts, and impulses under discipline, who have been great. And then he talks about Moses, and it says, of course, Moses was not a doormat. Moses got angry when it was appropriate. So here comes his final rewriting of the third beatitude. Oh, the bliss of those who are always angry at the right time and never angry at the wrong time, who have every instinct, impulse, and passion under control because they themselves are God-controlled, who have the humility to realize their own ignorance and their own weakness, for such people can indeed rule the world.
So while we might meet parts of that, our goal is to try over our lifetimes to achieve as much of that as possible.
That's the way I take it, yes.
Because I'm never going to master all of that, but I can do parts of that.
Right, I can do parts of it part of the time.
Yeah, but I'm never mastering all of that.
No, which is why we need God. Okay, any other comments? Okay, next one. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. And he goes on to talk about our understanding of hunger and thirst, because we really don't understand the level of hunger and thirst that the people who lived at Jesus's time did. He talks about how, if we get hungry, we can go have a snack, and the snack takes care of our hunger. A piece of bread will do it. If we're thirsty, we go to a tap and we turn it on, and there's clean, cold water, and we take have a small drink, and our thirst has been taken care of. He's talking about the level of hunger where a piece of bread won't do it. You need the whole loaf. A glass of water won't do it for thirst. You need the whole tank. It's that level of hunger and thirst that he's talking about, not one that we've ever experienced.
I don't think it's about physical hunger.
And it's not, but it's
Like the Olympic athlete or somebody at that level of self-discipline.
yes.
So hungry to, like when we started our softball team at church, there were people on there who had been or were semi-professional athletes and stuff, and then there was me. I mean, they're like a pit bull when they get into the game. And that's a level of hunger and thirst, I think they're talking.
Right. And he goes on to say, Um, this beatitude is in reality both a question and a challenge. In effect, it demands, how much do you want goodness? Do you want it as much as a starving person wants food, and as much as someone dying of thirst wants water? How intense is our desire for goodness?
Well, I'll be honest and say mine's not that high.
No, mine isn't either.
I mean, I try to be good, but when I fall short, I don't beat myself up for it. I just try to do better.
Yeah, but the level he's talking about here is way beyond anything I have ever considered. And, you know, I was little Miss Goody Two Shoes growing up.
Yeah, I didn't do wrong stuff either, other than pick on brothers and sisters and stuff. But I mean, I never, you know, nothing that we would consider evil or devil possessed or whatever. But about 8 lines down, it says this is the most demanding beatitude.
Yeah,
It says it is the most demanding and indeed the most frightening.
It kind of reminds me of people who leave their whole life behind, like a Mother Teresa, you know, somebody who devotes their entire life to, you know, the study of and doing the teachings of God, and just leaves it all behind. And very few people do that.
Nancy, don't you think we do that a little bit when we give to our children? You would do without the last piece of chicken to give it to your children. You would do without the last bottle of water to give it to your children on a hike. So a little bit we do that, but not to this level.
No. Mm-mm.
yeah. He goes on to say, the true wonder of human beings is not that we are sinners, but that even in our sin, we are haunted by goodness, that even in the mud, we can never wholly forget the stars. And he talks about how David wanted to build the temple, but he was never allowed to build the temple. In his mercy, God judges us not only by our achievements, but also by our dreams. Even if we never attain goodness, if to the end of our day we are still hungering and thirsting for it, we are not shut out from blessedness.
I like
That paragraph. Yeah.
because we're still trying.
Yeah, as long as you're trying, we'll, you know, that counts for something.
Well, and now in public education, Kathy will tell you, you get points for trying. I actually want the doctor that passed his medical exam, though, not tried hard.
Right, that's where I was going with it. It's like, okay, how's that going to work in the real world?
Exactly. I want the doctor that passed the boards, not the one that tried hard.
Right, and if you're a business person, you want the accountant that passed the CPA exam,
Right.
you know, passed the accounting. Yeah,
But I want God to cut me some slack. I'm still trying to be good.
yeah. So we got to work out those wrinkles.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, so here's his rewriting of it the first time. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for the whole of righteousness, for complete righteousness. That is, in fact, what people seldom do, which we were just talking about. They are content with part of righteousness. Some people, for instance, may be good in the sense that however hard they tried, you couldn't put a fault on them, but they're kind of, you know, frozen, you know, if you go to them, there's no sympathy. And then he talks about people who are drink and swear and gamble, but they'll give you their last penny. You're supposed to do it all. So his rewriting of the fourth one, oh, the bliss of those who long for total righteousness, as the starving long for food, and those perishing of thirst long for water, for they will truly be satisfied. Right.
These are a real challenge.
When I got through reading all of this, I thought, I am so screwed.
Me too.
I try to think about, here's Jesus, and this is this message that he's bringing all around the country, you know, all around the Sea of Galilee, and it's people coming to visit him. And what makes these different than what they're hearing and how they live their life, usually their relationship with God, because it's like they're used to having strong Roman rule above, and then they have their church telling them other things like what they can and can't do or whatever on a Sabbath day, and that type of thing. And what it must have really made, like you said, did they understand the message that he was saying, and then what made him different than all of the other preachers and teachers that were coming around?
Mm.
Yeah, good comment.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, if time travel were possible, I would love to be able to go back and be invisible because I don't want to mess up with history, but to follow Jesus around. Just to
He's
see.
got the idea that charlatan preachers back then were, pray for rain, pray for good crops, pray for many children, many sons. I never really thought traveling preachers prayed for this kind of salvation in your soul and life after death and all of that. I thought they would just, give me your money and I'll pray for some rain for you or some crops or, I don't know, a good grape harvest or something. I just didn't think they were doing it on this level. And that Jesus was unique in that way. Maybe I'm wrong.
Not sure.
Yeah,
Mm.
He obviously did something different because we're still talking about him and not the other guys.
that's correct. Good point.
Well, and also his message was not about, don't be concerned about material things, what you will wear, what you will eat today. Be concerned about the kingdom of heaven, which is a totally different concept.
Yeah. And
Yeah, he said, don't worry about the body which man can kill, worry about the soul which man cannot kill, or something to that effect.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to stop there. It is 10 till. So we got through 4 of them. So who's teaching next week?
Kathy.
Okay, Kathy, you're starting on page 118 with the bliss of perfect sympathy.
Cool.
I had prepared more, but as usual, we ran out of time, which I
But
love.
the discussion is really important,
I agree. I love it when we discuss.
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah, if I were the only person talking, I'd be bored. And
I
y'all,
like everybody else's perspectives.
yes, I usually learn something from y'all.
Oh, yeah.
I'll give you a little insight about me. If I'm the only one talking in Sunday school, I get mad.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Kathy, with the Sojourners class, when has that ever happened?
Fortunately, there's only been brief moments when I've been thinking,
Yeah, same
when
in
is somebody
fellowship.
else gonna talk?
Yeah, we talk a lot in fellowship too.
Yeah. Well, I remember telling Nancy one time she was going to do the lesson for the salad group, and she was expressed a little concern. I said, Nancy, read a paragraph out of the book, ask a question, and shut up. Take a minute because people have to think about it. But with any group in this church, give us a minute to think about it and just stand back and watch it happen.
And it was a beautiful lesson, Nancy.
But can we how important is it to spend time on the Beatitudes? Possibly one of the most significant parts of the Bible, if not the most significant part.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
And I think as far as teaching us
yeah,
fundamental values and lessons of God, the Beatitudes
yeah.
cover it.
Yeah.
They're right up
And-
there with the 10 Commandments.
And
We had
Barclay
it all
says,
wrong all this time.
Barclay says Jesus went over and over and over these verses many, many times. This is like the ultimate sermon.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank
I thank you guys too.
Thank you.
Okay,
See you later.
See you in worship.
okay.